this kind of transition us into like influencer status, especially as a minority, and for you as a young woman, people put a lot on you having a platform. Like people, think that you are a revolutionary or some type of like serious change agent when you're a person in a room with a webcam. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Especially being, I feel like, and I said this to you earlier, you and Mina Lay and Cheyenne Lynn kind of popped up, from at least from my perspective, around the same time. And so, like, do you feel like you have a large East Asian audience, or is it more mixed? And do you feel like a responsibility around that? Because that's a complex area of
Yeah.
sociological. There's a lot going on with East Asians in America and worldwide, and there's not like a clear thesis. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, there's a lot of factions, from my perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't really know. I think I've paid less attention to the race of my demographic only because I don't make as much like uh I guess like content specifically about it as you do. And so I think my obligation surrounding that area doesn't feel like as strong on me. But I am aware of the fact that like usually there's like the stereotype or the kind of like general notion that East Asians are not as like politically active as maybe like some other racial minorities, and that maybe they won't go as far or as radical with like what they do. And especially like, whoa, why are you doing like philosophy on YouTube? Why aren't you being an engineer or something? And
Fun stuff.
I've, yeah, but it's nice when people reach out to me and they tell me like, hey, like I really appreciate the East Asian representation on YouTube, especially in like these types of topics where I don't usually see, because I think, as I'm sure you might feel sometimes as well, like it's a quite white dominated space, and I think even like there are more Black creators I know of for sure in this space than East Asian. I think East Asians in general are just raised to not, in like, again, this is very general, but a lot of East Asians I know are not raised to think or care too much about their racial identity and how it plays into how they operate in the world.
Yeah, that is true. I talked to T Noir, if not last week, then the week before. And I kind of was giving her flowers around. We're calling it cornbread too, and I'll get to that later. When after you leave, as like a concept of how in the last couple of years, you mentioned during COVID, we had a lot of creators kind of pop off because there was all these eyes, and there was suddenly space and maybe a desire for more diversity in our general content area. And the Black women were perfectly fine with just being amongst like a community and not the greater bread tube left tube community, which was probably smart on their behalf because they don't have to be as beholden to a white audience and manage that like conflict that sometimes comes up where white audiences don't know how they come off to you for your content, and can come off entitled, insensitive, etc. And so, but no, for me though, that sense of obligation under a white audience becomes an obligation to talk about the race things that are important to them from their perspective, versus like, here are the race things that are important to me that I want to spread to the greater community. And so that's easier, I think, for Black creators because Blackness is a constant discourse, and we're constantly under attack for it. And so that conversation is at the forefront of a lot of Black creators' minds. Whereas, because like if I came on and never engaged with race, I would feel guilty and would never get a Black audience. Like my Black audience would be minuscule because they would look at me like I am wasting my platform and purposely avoiding very obvious things to talk about. Whereas because East Asian political perspectives are so divided and like varied, you can kind of go in and out. And sometimes going in too much will mess around and alienate some of your Asian viewers because they don't want to engage with it. So that brings us to the video you did with a foreign man, which I'm still mad about. You have, like, I just looked at it before we got on. You have 600,000 subs plus 640,000, and you did a video on the model minority myth, and it only has 140,000 views. Now I won't blame that on your viewers because that video was not just demonetized; it was age restricted. And I was just sitting there like, see, fucking YouTube doing exactly what it always does.
Oh God.
Yeah.
It was really annoying because I worked like really hard on that video, and it was, again, like, I don't usually make content focused like solely on racial topics, and this was like one of the ones that I was doing, and I was like, okay, like, I was a bit nervous, but I was like, I'm happy with what this is. And then it just age restricted. It was also like flagged for sensitive like content or whatever. So even if you were 18 or above, there was still like a warning on it.
Wow.
And then demonetized. So it wasn't being like recommended. My subscribers weren't getting notified by it. Like, they can't see it in their homepage. They would have to go to my channel to see the video. And yeah, I don't know. I tried to appeal it, obviously. Like, I tried to peel through YouTube Studio. I also, like, I think tried to go through Nebula and their connections, but just didn't work.
Still is a broader system issue that it's just very frustrating.
Yeah.
But the video itself got into, and that's I think something I definitely want to talk to you about, is that model minority concept and how there's a long-standing, and I think I said this in the video, there's like a long-standing connection between like Black people and Asian people in Black communities and Black spaces, because immigrant East and South Asian people have often been relegated to Black spaces upon arrival, which creates sometimes symbiotic unity, and a lot of times also like explicit conflict, because the cultural differences, the reality of being stuck in low income, low resource areas, and there's the natural conflict that happens. And then you fast forward and you have what's the dude's name? Charlie, is it Charlie Cheon?
Yeah.
Charlie Cheon. People have been asking me to talk about his video, and I'm like, I'm good.
Sticky situation.
I'm good. It's like I don't want to. I just don't have the energy to, because it's basic, sociology, history 101 stuff. I feel like that kind of illustrates where he's gone wrong. What was your response? And then what was the response? Because I know you had in your comment section, you had other Asian people that were, upset at you for kind of speaking to these issues the way you were.
Yeah, I mean, the comments that I got from those types of people on my video is probably Charlie Cheon-esque people. I think like this idea, because, and I talked about this in my video, but it's just like, for like the Asian American like population, a lot of us come from like immigrant families. We don't really have any true roots over here, and so it's quite easy for us to have notions of Asianness imposed onto us. It's like, oh, what does being Asian mean? Well, I don't really know. This is what other people are telling me, so I'll just take it. And it makes it feel like identity creation is a very like individual blank slate thing. And so it kind of causes this feeling that like other people should be able to create their identity free from any context as well. And it just really ignores, as you said, like history 101 on how communities are different from one another and how they've like grown in America and how they've been treated historically. I think something, for example, is like colorism. So,
Ooh, I know that's
it's like Yeah, no.
No, go ahead.
It's
Go
like a
ahead.
major like thing in just like Asia in general. Even within Asian communities, it's like a hierarchy of light-skinned people and then, the darkest skinned. And a lot of people will say, oh, but like colorism comes far from ancient times where farmers were forced to work outside, so they had darker skin, and wealthy people would stay inside. So it's not like a race thing, it's just like this old class thing, and it no longer matters. But it's kind of weird that people say that, because it's like,
That
yeah,
still
it was
sounds fucked up.
it's like it was an ancient thing, yeah. Maybe we don't have farmers anymore, but that affected how darker skinned Asians were able to move up, like the social ladder through history. And so it's like these historical effects, because we erase them, it makes us think they're just naturally less capable, when really it's like a product of everything along the way.
Yeah, that natural thing is like the enemy of all progressive thought right now. I feel is, and you said this when we had talked earlier, like people, your Charlie Cheons, your average conservative to centrist, your average centrist going into the far right, they really want this concept of just there being a natural way that the world is. Thus, you shouldn't put in so much effort to challenge or fight those ways, even if they do harm to people. If they do harm to people, then that's just, that's obviously their fault for not being aligned with the natural forces of life. And so, like, yeah, that was one thing that was interesting to me in different studies I've around race, going back into like, I know we had talked about The Myth of the Model Minority by Dr. Rosalind Chow. And like realizing that colorism is like a worldwide phenomenon among non-white, among people of color, and consistently it's people of darker skin, whether it be in African American communities, Asian, South Asian communities that are treated as a lower caste because of that of that history, whether it be a history of colonization or this semi-truthful, farmer noble class issue, which is still, in my opinion, just as bad. And people want to just let that sit there and have its natural role versus doing the hard work of unpacking and like getting rid of these things that harm people, especially when they're people who are less likely to be harmed,
Yeah. I think one of the ways that I was thinking about this today, like how people are kind of naturalized in certain things. I'm gonna expose my parents and like other people real quick. Thank God they don't watch this. But I'll hear them or like family friends or relatives say things like, oh, like, would you look at Black people, like Jamaicans and people in the Bahamas? They're just so carefree. It's just their culture. Like, that's just how they are. They just want to enjoy life like a hedonist. Like, first of all, why do we disvalue enjoying life over working? But that's like a whole other discussion. But like, I think it's just interesting how they have this idea of like Black people is as this essentialized group because of like certain types of ways that Black folk are represented in media, and that's kind of like their only exposure to the Black community because they never had to interact with them before they came to Canada. But I was like, wait a second, white people have tons of movies where they're drinking, doing drugs, committing crimes, like going off the rail. How do we watch like Hangover, the whole Hangover series, and not think white people are absolute bozos? Like, why do people not come to that conclusion? And it's like, oh, well, this white person just represents some random imaginary citizen, but like these Black actors, we take them to represent like Black people specifically. And it's like this really frustrating area of being any type of minority, where it's like you kind of have to watch what you do, because then people take you as some sort of representative of the group.
You have to be an avatar for everyone that shares your phenotype, not even your race, because we group like Asian is such a bizarre concept to begin with, because like I did my last video, I had Elliot saying, who I think is in the chat, shout out to Elliot, and then I had a guy that he does a hip-hop podcast who's Pakistani, I believe. And it's like, so Elliot is half white, half Cambodian, I think. And then like there's in Pakistan, so that's like two very different, ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, nations, etc. But in the West, we're going to flatten that. All of that's Asian. You know what I'm saying? And we're going to just group you guys over here as a interest group, a voting block, or whatever, as long as you're not white, which, some of you will see what we can do later on down the line. Flipping away from that, going back, because I know you talked about this before. When I talk about Elliot saying, aside from him, I can't think of a lot of Asian men, Asian max presenting people who are, doing work within this nebulous space, whether it be, left tuber Jace, commentary Jace, whatever. Aside from Hamza, who is South Asian and is kind of a kind of bizarre figure in the manosphere, there's not a lot. And I as a young, and when I think about, you had a video about this, the way that Asian women are fetishized in general. Like, what has your experience been like being so young, being highly visible, you know what I'm saying, and the stressors of like people just being, for lack of a better, putting it very weird online, because they think that like we're not real people behind the screen,
Yeah, it's been it's like, I think it's honestly made me actually a little more aware of my race and how that intersects with being a woman, because as I mentioned before, like I wasn't really raised to think about my race in a political way. I, even to this day, I admit, like, I think about myself more as woman first, which is why I think I talk about feminism and women issues more than my race on my channel. But when I see comments being like, oh my god, my anime girlfriend, or when I'm not Japanese, or just things like, oh my god, like you look so cute, you look so like innocent. Like I get that a lot because East Asians, especially women and men as well, which I think hinders like how seriously they can be taken in like cornbread tube, whatever. It's like
Asian men, I mean, I didn't have the bandwidth to get into this as much with Elliot. He's gotten into it on his channel. Shout out to Elliot. There's this like innate, like black men, to a lesser extent maybe Latino men, and South Asian men, we have this hyper masculinized presence where we're these, brutes, and sexual predator, deviant adjacent folks, and then like East Asian men are hypo-masculinized, and so like they're kind of degendered in a different type of way, which I think contributes to, somebody put in the chat, MR Asians, because like Asian men are kind of overrepresented in manosphere adjacent spaces, because I think there's this angst in the West in particular around feeling like you can connect to like the traditional classic image of masculinity. And then when you see, like somebody mentioned the Hangover, like you mentioned the Hangover, like when you see what's the actor's name in the Hangover, the Asian man,
I forget his name.
Yeah, Kim.
I only know him as Senior Chang from Community.
Senior Chang from Community.
Yeah.
Where like, he jumps out the car and he's naked, and the joke is, look at this small Asian man, right? Like that's incredibly dehumanizing. And then you have the flip side of the fetishization. I don't know how y'all do it, to be honest with you. I've gotten a few creepy, DMs, but not a lot. I don't. The film Ken Jeong, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's just the most frustrating part is like, well, like women in general are already like, oh, look at you, you're a woman. Like I've gotten people reacting to me on YouTube, but like they'll always have to mention my appearance. Like oh my god, look at her. How much time must she have spent on her makeup? Girls only care about looking cute. Or like, hey guys, let's like rate her appearance. What do you guys rate her? 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 6 out of 10? What do you think? And it's like on top of that, which I think is kind of a universal experience for women. There's like but she's also East Asian, so she's like, we're gonna rate her appearance, but also it's like her appearance infantilizes her in some way, and I really don't like that. I kind of understand, I guess, because you brought up how like Asian men are overrepresented in manosphere because of this, and I kind of understand, because you just kind of want to rebel against this label that's been put on you, because not how you feel at all. Which sucks.
It's Du Bois calls it the double consciousness, and when he talked about it, he was specifically talking about Black people, but I think it's really useful as a concept of being a person of color living under white supremacy and or colonization, because both of these experiences are within the context of normative gender standards, which are white, right? So compared to a white woman, Asian women are smaller and more youthful and more innocent, and thus this engenders this perverse, almost pedophilic even, or amphibiaphilic desire that somehow people don't clock when they're, in your comment section. And then for Asian men, who, I guess are less hairy. I don't know, because it's a weird dynamic, and I don't want to dive too much deep into it. But for Asian men, it's because white men look different as well. It becomes where we're going to push you towards a more in the same, like, more effeminate standard. There's a book I read on one of the great bastions for gender discourse is gay pornography, because gay pornography like perfectly encapsulates gender dynamics around race, because it's, all pornography, most pornography is white male gaze centered. And so, like, what do white men desire to see from a pornographic perspective? And then when you make it queer, it like flips it on its head a little bit. And so you have like the phenomenon where you rarely see Asian men top, and you rarely see Black men bottom in gay pornography. And so there's like a lot of research on like how that phenomenon is reflective of like the greater dynamics of race and sex in general in the West, because that's just the shit we're dealing with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's just the reality of the situation. And so I get why Charlie, swinging it back, I get why Charlie Cheon wants to take his shot at being a Candace Owens alike. You know what I'm saying? I get why that's a lane to open up, and there's less punishment for it. Like, he can do that. Yeah. And sadly, because of the way East Asian culture can work in America, there's not as much blowback. Whereas if Candace Owens is a pariah, cannot come back home.
Exactly.
Yeah.